President Xi Jinping and Joe Biden will speak tonight for the first time since Russia invaded Ukraine. A new center run by Tan Tock Seng Hospital brings specialist care to the heartland. And Moderna is asking the US to authorize a second COVID-19 booster shot for all adults. Hello, you're watching The Big Story with me, Olivia Quay. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you don't miss a single episode. The presidents of the United States and China are scheduled to have a call later today about Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine and other issues of mutual concern. According to the White House, US President Joe Biden will warn his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping against supporting Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. The conversation will be the first between the two leaders since November.
We believe China in particular has a responsibility to use its influence with President Putin and to defend the international rules and principles that it professes to support. Instead, it appears that China is moving in the opposite direction by refusing to condemn this aggression while seeking to portray itself as a neutral arbiter. And we're concerned that they're considering directly assisting Russia with military equipment to use in Ukraine. President Biden will be speaking to President Xi tomorrow and will make clear that China will bear responsibility for any actions it takes to support Russia's aggression, and we will not hesitate to impose costs.
Let's now get the perspective from China with the Straits Times' China Bureau Chief Tan Dongwei, who's in Beijing. So Dawn, as we enter the fourth week of the war, China has maintained its neutral stance, at least in public. Is that likely to change?
Well, it's really quite hard to say because no one really knows what the Chinese leadership is thinking. Everyone has an opinion about what China's calculus is, and there have been such a large amount of assessment and analysis and interpretation on China's thinking based on reading between the lines in a very opaque system. What we can see from the official channels, such as the daily foreign ministry briefings, from state media coverage, from readouts of phone calls and meetings involving Chinese officials, is that China has pretty much stuck to the same overarching position, which is that it calls on the US and Europe to consider Russia's legitimate security concerns, and that is the expansion of NATO eastwards. But it also acknowledges that a country's sovereignty and territorial integrity should be respected, and that it supports a peaceful resolution to this conflict and is willing to work with the international community in mediation efforts. It has refused to engage in questions by journalists about why it refuses to condemn the war or call it an invasion, especially when it says it upholds the UN Charter. And what would it take, or how many lives have to be lost before China finally condemns the war? Its response to these questions has always been to repeat its official script, spelling out its supposedly neutral position. But it has also doubled down on its informal alliance with Russia by saying the relationship between the two sides are rock solid and that Russia is its most important strategic partner. It is, of course, coming under a lot of pressure for that alignment, and no doubt has suffered quite a bit of reputational hit internationally. But putting aside whatever assessments about China, how China can or will benefit from this conflict, it is very clear that it is very unwilling to be drawn into it. And that came out quite obviously last week in a phone call that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had with his Spanish counterpart, where he said China is not a party to this conflict, and it all the more doesn't want sanctions to affect it. So you can see that it is, in fact, more worried about how it could be hit by the sanctions or the economic repercussions of the war, which will or has already driven up commodity prices and also disrupt the global supply chain. Because keeping its economy healthy and looking good this year is the top priority for the Chinese leadership because it is heading into a very important party congress at the end of the year where President Xi Jinping will ask to extend his term. But I think China has already long made up its mind about its alignment with Russia, which has been a pretty consistent supporter and partner to Beijing. And China is probably convinced that whatever it does will not change the fact that the US will continue its containment efforts against it. I don't think it would want the war to drag on, but it surely is not going to do the US's bidding either and be pressured or be seen to be pressured by the US or Europe to act.
Well, Dawn, we are looking ahead to today's call between Presidents Xi and Biden. And this is, of course, coming in the wake of a Monday meeting between U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi. And they met for 7 hours on Monday. But the official statements coming out of those talks were quite different about what was discussed about the Ukraine conflict. So looking ahead to tonight's call between the two presidents, is this something we can also expect?
Yes, if you have seen the statements from both sides that came out of that Monday meeting, you will see that they focused on quite different things. The US readout was very short and simply said that they talked about a range of US-China relations issues with substantial discussion of Russia's war against Ukraine. But the Chinese readout was very much focused on Taiwan and China's other core interests, such as Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and Tibet, and was about Yang Jiechi basically reminding the US of its commitment to the One China policy and warning it not to interfere in China's domestic affairs. Ukraine got a small mention at the very end of the statement, so we didn't really get a good sense of what the Chinese position on Ukraine was in that discussion. But for tonight's phone call, we know from the US side that Mr. Biden plans to put pressure on Mr. Xi and make clear that China will bear responsibility for any actions that it takes to support Putin's war, and that the US will not hesitate to impose costs. The foreign ministry was asked for details about this call just now during its afternoon briefing, and it acknowledged that the two leaders will talk about Ukraine, among other things, but they didn't really say much more than that. But a report in the Global Times today said China agreed to the phone call because it wanted to urge the US to stop fanning the flames of war, stop spreading false information about China, and also to start promoting a peaceful resolution and peace talks instead. And Mr. Xi is also likely to warn Mr. Biden to stop coercing China, and that China will also respond if its national interests, the interests of its companies and its people are affected. But we will have to see how the two sides frame the discussion much later tonight.
Thanks very much to our China Bureau Chief Tan Dongwei in Beijing. Look out for the Straits Times' reports on the Biden-Xi call later tonight on straitstimes.com. The situation in Ukraine remains volatile after 3 weeks of fighting. In the besieged city of Mariupol, officials say some 80% of homes have been destroyed, many beyond repair. Some 30,000 residents have managed to escape so far, but another 350,000 remain in the city where there's no electricity, gas, water or communications. Russia has scrapped a UN Security Council vote on a so-called humanitarian resolution on Ukraine due to a lack of support from its closest allies, China and India. Moscow had already twice postponed the vote, which condemned attacks on civilians and called for their safe passage. In local news, specialist healthcare in the heart of Ang Mo Kio is now available for its residents with the opening of a new centre run by Tan Tock Seng Hospital. Located at AMK Avenue 8, the centre has key services like diabetes care, specialist eye care, as well as care for hearing-related issues. It's manned by TTSH staff and will more heavily involve polyclinics and GPs in managing residents' health. This is in line with the recently announced Healthier SG strategy that shifts from a hospital-centric care model to one focused on more sustainable preventive care. Here's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, who officially opened the centre today.
The new specialist centre brings a suite of specialist healthcare facilities and services right to the doorsteps of the residents, as you heard from Professor So just now. Until recently, an elderly resident in Ang Mo Kio who has blurred vision would have been referred to Tan Tock Seng Hospital for testing, consultation, treatment, and follow-up. But with this new centre, he can now obtain medical treatment, cataract surgery, and post-surgery reviews right in his neighbourhood. In making specialist medical treatment more accessible for residents, this specialist centre seeks to provide a more seamless healthcare experience.
Here's a sight we haven't seen in about 2 years. Muslims at mosques island-wide no longer have to be spaced apart during congregational prayers. This as safe management measures for religious organizations were loosened on Tuesday, doing away with safe distancing in mosque-on settings, as well as lifting the 1,000-person cap on worship services. Minister in charge of Muslim Affairs Masagos Zulkifli says more mosque activities are set to return during Ramadan, which starts on April the 2nd. According to the Family Justice Courts, from 2020 to 2021, the number of divorces in Singapore rose by 2%, but still lower than in 2019, before the pandemic. The number of amicable splits also increased, with uncontested divorces going up from 60% in 2020 to 63% last year. Singapore's COVID-19 weekly infection growth rate continues to fall to 0.73 yesterday. It's the 16th straight day that the figure is below 1. The daily case count also dipped, about 10,700 new infections reported last night. The vast majority of the local cases are still mild, with some 9,400 detected through ART. The other 1,100 or so were identified via PCR tests. There were 1,230 COVID-19 patients in hospital as at noon yesterday, 29 in ICU and another 146 needing oxygen support. Elsewhere, China's new symptomatic cases doubled from the previous day, with close to 2,400 reported yesterday. While President Xi Jinping says China will stick to its zero COVID-19 policy, its recovery guidelines have changed. Patients with mild symptoms no longer have to be hospitalized, but can instead go to centralized quarantine facilities to ease pressure on the healthcare system. Meanwhile, Moderna has asked the US Food and Drug Administration for emergency authorization of a second COVID-19 booster for all adults. It's a significantly broader request than what Pfizer submitted this week, which only covered a second booster for those aged 65 and older. Well, those are our top stories today. Visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Olivia Quay. Thank you for watching The Big Story and have a good weekend.